Started. We're having a special speaker today for the beginning of the year, especially for the new students, but everyone can probably benefit from this. Dr. Shoshana Zeisman-Pereyo manages OHSU Student Academic Support Services. She has 18 years experience working in higher education and is passionate about helping learners achieve their academic goals. She is available to meet with students to help them with active learning strategies, test-taking strategies, learning styles, time management, and adjusting to OHSU's learning environment, which, as we know, can be pretty intense. Additionally, she supports students and learners by advocating for them and working with faculty to ensure that the learning environment is supportive, inclusive, and welcoming for all learners. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this on? Can y'all hear me? Wait, there was the camera. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, okay. Hi, so I am Shoshana Zeisman-Pereyo, and I do manage student academic support services here on campus. And today is really about setting yourself up for academic success. So could I just see a show of hands? How many of you are all relatively new to OHSU? So starting, okay, so almost everybody. Great, then my audience is correct for this presentation. Come on in. Oh, before I actually get really started, I am going to actually pass around a couple of sign-in sheets because we like data, right? And it's important for us to know who's here. We won't spam you. I mean, I can't guarantee that. I mean, I'm pretty sure we won't. So please feel free to fill this out. All right. Where's my clicker? Okay. So objectives. So in this talk, I want to talk about different learning strategies. I want to identify at least one active learning strategy that you can incorporate throughout your program. And I want to share some advice that I have received from your upperclassmates. So anything that's in purple is something that I have actually heard from your upperclassmates. So it might be something I would have said already, something that I will echo, but something that has specifically been shared with me. So look out for the purple. And then establish essential resources on campus to help you succeed. I will also tell you that I've already sent this presentation to Diane in PDF form because there are actually some hyperlinks in here that have some really great resources. So you don't need to feverishly be taking notes or writing down any of some of the different websites I'm going to point out because hopefully you'll be able to get a copy of this presentation later. All right, are we there yet? It's day 4 for some of y'all. Does this feel familiar yet? Have you seen this? Have you heard of this, like, drinking from the fire hose metaphor? I see. Yes, yes, yes. All right. How are we feeling right now? If you could describe how you're feeling in one word about school, about your program, tell me what are some words you would use to describe how you're feeling? Time to share. Excited. Excited? Okay. Have classes started, right? Yeah? Okay, so we're excited. Busy. The noisiest whiteboard I've ever written. Busy, excited. Sleepy. I'm sleepy too. Okay, yes. Happy? Great. Any other words? Curious? Has anyone looked ahead in your syllabi at like any of the assignments to come? Any feelings on that? Stressed? Okay. mostly all very positive emotions. Sometimes when we start really big programs, we feel anxious. We feel concerned about handling the amount of information that might be thrown at us. And hopefully, through some of the resources we're going to talk about today, through some of the active learning strategies and tips, we're going to give you some ideas for handling the flow of information that's going to come at you. Because sometimes it's going to feel really manageable, and sometimes it's going to feel like you are literally drinking from a fire hose. And that's okay, but you need to make sure that you have some coping strategies. So, how many of you have heard of learning styles preferences? Okay. So, the literature on learning styles preferences tells us, well, you tell me. Do you think they matter? Okay.
So, I mean, the context of the material that you're teaching is going to determine how it matches with different learning styles. Somebody who's wanting to teach this more interactive to matches more useful to courses that manual activities programs as opposed to a course that's teaching about simple algebra.
Sure.
So it's really going to be kind of a complex amalgam of things that
Yeah, so oftentimes we take learning styles preferences, and maybe some of us haven't even ever taken a learning style preference, or we think we lean towards different learning styles, and we often don't maybe see beyond that. So we're just going to take about 5 minutes right now and do a quick learning styles inventory, and then I will give you further instructions after you do that. So please, let me hand it out the right way. Take a few minutes to fill this out. If you would like to fill this out, oh, I'll let you know. I manage the crowd well. I think that is 3. right, I think I can tell most of y'all are done. Any surprises? Oh yeah, I like lots of audience participation, if you haven't noticed. Any surprises? No. No? Let's hear a no. No surprises at all? Okay. So a couple of things. Do learning styles really matter? So yes and no, right? So for one, it is helpful to have a go-to, right? A way in which we like to take in information and make it our own. It doesn't mean that's the only way in which we can learn information. It doesn't mean that if we don't particularly like a lecture style environment that we can't learn from lecture. But it's about thinking about how we can take information in so that we can provide the foundation and the scaffolding to learn new information, right? And so what I think is even more important than just the way in which we enjoy learning is the second handout I gave you. So it breaks down the 4 different learning modalities, which this particular learning inventory breaks down visual a little bit differently than other inventories I've seen. So you have visual graphic and visual text. So some other inventories will just do visual, which for me, I like the way they break this out because when I say, are you a visual learner, some people will say yes, right? And for me, specifically who I am, like I am not a visual graphic learner, but I'm actually a visual text learner. So I actually like words, but images, like if you were to draw a mind map, like I would look at that and it just looks like gobbledygook in my brain. I like can't do it. It does not work. So the way in which this particular inventory breaks out visual graphic and visual text is really helpful. But I think even more than that, what I like is this third column that I've created, which are active studying tips. So again, maybe how many of y'all are kinesthetic learners? Okay. So what do you do when you're stuck in a lecture class? Does that mean you can't learn?
No, I don't really do
300 things at the same time. Oh, I think you said 300. 3. So if you were to look at that right-hand column, there are some tips in there for things you can think about doing. So our kinesthetic learners might think about, okay, I need to maybe stand up in the back of the classroom, right? Or maybe if I am someone who needs to spend many hours doing a task, like studying, maybe I need to have an exercise ball in which I can sit on so I can keep my body in motion and my mind can stay focused. So really take a look later, not right now, but later at that right-hand column and see if there are any active studying tips that you hadn't thought of that really do dial in to your learning styles preference that allow you to be actively engaged while you're learning. Because that is really the takeaway I want you to walk away with. It's that you can have a go-to learning styles preference, but it has to be something that you're actively doing. We don't want to be passively engaged in the learning process. We need to be actively engaged. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Nope. Okay. So on the screen, we see 2 different images, this and this. What's the difference between these 2 pictures, this picture on the left and the picture on the right? Has anyone ever had a book that looks like this? All right, what are we doing in this picture on the left? You're speed reading. Oh, you're tracking your place. Anyone else? Has anyone ever done this with like a journal article or a chapter in a book? Okay. So what happens after we've highlighted everything? Nothing's highlighted, right? So now it is all just pink. And potentially, either everything that we thought was important, now everything just blends into each other, right? So what's happening to this picture on our right?
What's happening on the page on the right is that somebody's trying to highlight relevant information that you'll pick out in your video later. I would argue that somebody who's doing on the left, off the left, loses in terms of going back to the video page.
would just take another step back and say, really think about the times in our educational lives and our histories where we've done that, where we've highlighted and highlighted and highlighted, and everything ends up being highlighted, and we have, we try to go back and have we processed anything. So I just encourage you to think about, again, are we actively engaged in the material? And so the difference really to me when I look at these two things is that this person over here is really trying to consolidate information, make their own categories, and synthesize the information from whatever resources they're using. So whether it is from lecture or from a book or from PowerPoints, multiple resources, and make it their own. So they have categorized, they have used colors, so someone that might be very visual, they've used colors, they have drawn, which is great, but again, they have made it their own.
Shoshana, I want to point out that the text on the picture on the right is actually somebody's journal, that they wrote all that down. Is that correct?
Yes, they made their own notes.
It's not a textbook that they highlighted. They took notes in that journal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that.
Yes, yes. What was that? More work? Yes. Typically, it does.
Down is how you learn.
Yeah, typically, it takes more work for us to retain the information. Yes. All right, so if we could form some little groups, like around, so groups of like 4. I'm just, if you could share in your groups, how is it that you approach studying new material? And then we're going to share back out. So I'll give you just a couple of minutes to talk about if you were walking into a class and they were giving you new information, how is it that you approach studying new information of any variety? So if you could form little groups. we're going to come back together as a large group. So who wants to share first? A strategy that you talked about in your group. Who wants to, what group might want to share something that y'all talked about in your group? Yes.
So one of the things that came up when we were discussing is the one of the issues is that you have this heterogeneity of learning styles, and it's not so much that there's like a one-cut solution. People often have a blend of different advantages and things, and even these nice, cute little bins here, often there's a lot of overlap between them. And so one of the things that came up with us as a potential way to overcome that is leveraging the use of more social study groups, which can have kind of their own kind of structure, evolve organically to kind of conform to the particular heterogeneity of the individual members that comprise that group in terms of allowing dissemination of information.
Study groups, that is great. Did anyone else talk about studying together? Study groups, yep. So I also think reciprocal peer teaching, so being able to teach each other. One of the things about study groups I hear all the time from learners is, I don't like studying in groups because I'm not often ready to study when the study group is ready. I'm seeing some heads shaking, right? Like, I'm not ready on Thursdays when everyone else is ready. I need more time with the material. I would argue that I see that. But sometimes, if you go in, there should be goals when you do study groups, right? Like, you should be able to walk into a study group, and there should be a couple of ideas and objectives going in. Number one, you walk in so that you walk out saying, okay, I've checked these things off the list. Like, I really know these things, so I don't need to solo study those. But I still don't understand these 3 topics, and I need to go back home by myself or wherever and study these. So you have some objectives going in, and you also have some ground rules, right? Because sometimes if we have our friends in our study groups, they tend to turn into social circles. So making sure that you really have some ground rules, and then again objectives for walking in and out of those study group sessions with. But typically that ability to teach each other, or even depending on the structure of whether it's a weekly exam or a midterm or a final, if you assign different parts of the content to each person in your study group, then that is also another way in which you can divide and conquer the material. What are some other suggestions that you came up with in your groups? Yes. Sure. So do you have an example of
There's a very stark evaluation. So you're going to have to be a connect.
Sure. Sure. And on-the-job training, right? So you're learning while doing. Exactly. Other suggestions that y'all came up with? Yes.
Well, we were just talking about, at least I don't have the ability to sit in a chair and study for long periods of time. It's better for me to set a timer and say, okay, I'm going to study this for the next 25 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. And then I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to come back. So my husband, unlike my husband who could sit in a chair for 6 hours and study, I can't do that.
Sure.
I need to have defined bits of time with little breaks.
Yeah, and I think I'll touch on that in just a minute about sort of our personality types in terms of our time management, and then how we can sit for very long in terms of studying. What are some other suggestions? What do y'all do what is the difference between studying something that's conceptual versus maybe something that's rote memory? Any suggestions? I heard of something over here. I'm mumbling. Yes.
With rote memory, I have a tendency to just write it over and over and over again, and I'll use color coding, like color-coded highlighters, so that I can recall it visually when I need it.
All right. So we have writing it over and over and over again. Anyone use flashcards for memorization? Okay. So flashcards are like an electronic version of a flashcard. What about our conceptual learning? Like, so big picture conceptual. What are some suggestions? Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that it helps me to add some sort of conceptual meaning to something I'm trying to memorize.
Yes, I mean that usually helps. And I would argue that very rarely is it typically just rote memory, right? Like we often have to. It takes some thought process to figure out, is this actually just rote memory, or is there a conceptual piece to this that we have to think through? Yes.
And then for like rote memory tasks, you'll try and come up with mnemonics. I, for one, find that mnemonics from other people are incredibly unhelpful. It's like, I'm just having to remember your stupid rule that you came up with that's more work than memorizing the thing. Whereas, you know, my own are like incredibly idiosyncratic and pointless and like, oh, this both, you know, starts with the same letter or other just dopey kind of things. But if you think of your own, it's a lot more helpful.
Mnemonics, memory palaces, things like that are really helpful for our rote memory. Yes.
I found for rote memory that the layered approach is most effective, so you can try it in multiple ways, and it's a lot easier to retain if you write it down and say it, then they all automatically.
Okay. That, and I would also argue spaced repetition, right? So if you have to memorize or even conceptually learn something, you know, doing it the night before an exam isn't going to work, as well as thinking about, oh, I have 2 weeks before my exam. How can I break this up and go over it multiple times before I have my exam? It's going to be much more helpful. So in terms of active learning or studying, you know, again, it's about being actively engaged in the material because it is so easy to sit and study. Well, okay, it is not easy to sit and study. It's easy to make it very passive, right? So we sit, we open our book, passive. We can have that illusion of studying. How many times have you had your laptop open, your book open, and you might even just be recopying PowerPoints? Has that ever happened to you? You're just like, nope, never. A couple hours go by, and you're like, what have I been doing, right? It's that illusion of studying. You feel like you're putting the work in, but nothing's really sticking in the brain because we're not actively engaged in the material. So some tips. It's important, especially if we're working with conceptual things, to take a step back and find the big picture. What is it that I need to really, how do I connect the dots and see the big picture? Creating summary charts of the needed information can be really helpful. And I understand that y'all are all taking different types of classes, and so some of these tips will not work for certain things in certain classes that you're doing. But when you can, summary charts can be really helpful, because imagine if you could create a chart, and I am not even going to attempt to give you a chart that would apply to your particular field, but if you can create a chart of the information, it's going to condense what could be pages and pages and pages of notes into one page, right? Where you can compare and contrast that information, where you can visually see, for us visual learners, and even our linear visual text learners, you can see that information on one page versus multiple pages. But you want to actively learn the charts. You want to ask yourself, why is this particular piece of information related to the next piece of information? How might they test me on this information? Can I create questions and then answer them? So again, actively engaged in the process, actively engaged with the information. Practice, again, applying information through questioning. But what's even more important than all of that, and especially for all of the new students, is asking yourself consistently and constantly, what's working? What's not working? Am I actively engaged? Am I learning the material? Or am I just shoving it in my brain and taking a test and losing it? Because I think we have all done that before in our past educational lives. And so it's really important to make sure that we're retaining the information. So we have to have a reflective piece of this process. All right, so now, a couple of additional learning tools. SQ4R, have any of you heard of this? Couple? So this is actually something that I remember being taught this when I was in elementary school, and I don't know that it's actually taught here in Oregon. I did not grow up here. But SQ4R is an active reading technique. I won't go too much into it, but it is, because you can Google it, but it's, the S stands for scan, Q is question, and then the 4 R's are read, relate, recite, and review. And the idea is that, again, reading by nature is very passive, right? We open up a magazine, we're at the beach, we're just reading. Very passive. So SQ4R is a process that allows us to make reading an active activity. So you can take anything that you're reading, whether it's PowerPoint slides, a journal article, a chapter in a textbook, and make it active. First thing you do, scan it. How is it set up? How is it organized? Are there pictures? Look at the charts. And then create questions. And so if, for example, if you're looking at PowerPoint slides that your lecturer might be providing you, do they have learning objectives? Turn those learning objectives into questions so that when you then start going through the PowerPoint slides, the idea is that you're trying to answer the questions that you've created. So the question, the Q and SQ4R is almost the most important piece in this, because the idea is that when you sit down to read something, it's not always about reading from the first word to the last word, but mostly about thinking about reading with intention and reading to answer questions. So either you're reading to answer the learning objectives, so like a treasure hunt, or learning objectives are great if they are available to you. Or you can turn the headings in a chapter or textbook into questions. And again, being really intentional about that. I would also argue that pre-work, especially for those of you that are in classes, whether it's online or in person, and really being prepared. Thinking back to any class where you've walked in and you have some sense of familiarity of what's to come, you're going to get more out of that class than if you walk in cold. So I would argue 30 minutes to an hour per hour of lecture. So whatever that looks like, depending on your classes, I recommend that you do that. Again, that also depends on your instructor and what they're providing you with and what's available in Sakai and can you do the pre-work. That is really between you and your instructors. Again, reciprocal peer teaching. Can you teach it back to somebody else? Do you understand it? Charts, diagrams, pictures, mind maps. And reflection and self-assessment. So again, it's not just about, am I studying correctly? Am I retaining the information? But also taking the time and going back over your exams. So those of you that are in courses where you have exams, looking at them and really being critical and saying, okay, am I missing questions because it's a content deficit? Or am I missing questions because I'm misreading them, or I'm not taking enough time on my test, or I'm having an issue with test anxiety, but really going back over them and not just saying, oh, I got an 85%, I'm okay with that, but really taking the time if they do a secure review or release the exams, and really being critical of what's missing here. Why did I miss 15% of this exam? And trying to figure out that missing piece. Okay, I gotta read my notes because my computer screen is really little. So this is, again, something for all of the new learners in the room. So again, everything in purple, and you will be able to get this, I think, emailed to you. So these are really good, helpful tips. So straight from your upper classmates. So learn statistics and programming so you can analyze your data efficiently and plot your results. And so they gave me some suggestions to send you, so you can go to those sites. Get used to writing and having to explain your work to others. So this came through loud and clear when I asked for advice from your upper classmates. Also, finding scientists and you admire and keeping up with their work through their blogs, publications, and or presentations. Using Twitter for keeping up with science. And then there's a couple of Twitter accounts they suggested that you follow. Also, figuring out a system for bibliography and knowledge management, because that's important. Keep a personal PhD notebook so that you can continually go back and reread notes. And then there is an article there for you to read why that is important. And then this is a PDF, even though it didn't hyperlink, but you can go there once we send this out. that is how to be a successful PhD student. So there's a ton of resources here that you will want to comb through later for those of you that are all new. Okay? But I will let you do that because I don't know all about the programming stuff. So before I get into the why we're going to do this, I just want you to sort of sit with a partner, and I want you to just take a minute and go over two strategies of reducing stress during the week. Yes. 2 strategies. Okay. I'm glad we like talking about reducing stress. Okay. So in a moment, you will see that some of the advice that your upperclassmates shared was having some ways in which you could alleviate stress during your program. And so another reason why it's important to think about ways in which you can create balance is because when we're stressed and anxious is often the times where learners tend to just kind of bury their heads in the sand and say, I'm going to keep studying, I'm going to keep studying. And that is like big red flag, like, nope, you need to take a break. So I want to hear from you. What are some of the suggestions that you're going to do during the week to sort of just try to incorporate some balance into your lives? Yes.
Hopefully this doesn't cause feedback this time. One of the things that came up is having essentially effectively a plan. So scheduling out your weeks, but not just scheduling in terms of what you need to do for work, but actually figuring out, okay, where can I kind of squeeze in work so that way I can fit it around my life and have other things that I'm doing that, naturally just by doing them kind of, keep your stress levels and your sanity intact.
Great.
I think having hobbies that have some component of something that happens at a particular time at a particular place with other people is very helpful. So if I have a dance coach that expects me to be at the studio at a certain time, then I will do it. Whereas some of, I don't draw and paint as much as I used to because it always gets put off. So having that kind of external control and set time to do something fun is helpful.
Great. One more.
So, for example, like dipping on music, it's much more about going with like with your feel, you know, and that's kind of much easier than doing something that you're going to have to like think about and kind of analyze what you're doing.
Sure.
You know, cooking is another example.
Great. Thank you. So I will also share that I'm sure as many of you know is that when we're stressed and anxious and then also trying to study, that our brains are only taking in about 15% of what they normally do. So we're not, that number is not 100%, but we're, again, not absorbing as much as we normally would. So when we're really stressed out, but we still like try to power through, we're just not as effective as we normally are. So it is really important that we take the time to have some semblance of balance, even during the busiest parts of your program, when you're up against deadlines, that you do figure out a way in which you can have some balance. So some suggestions. Remember, purple is upperclassmates. I would also echo this. Is reducing distractions, planning ahead, and using your strengths. So thinking about how do you meal plan, get sleep, exercise, plan your week. So thinking about how you fit all of that in to your week. When you do finally sit down, if you are in your phase of your program where you're taking coursework versus doing research, or even doing research, thinking about reducing distractions. So if your distraction happens to be your phone, you might want to have that not right in front of you while you're trying to study. Or social media. And I would also argue that where and when you study is as important as how and what you are studying. So I will tell you that when I was writing my dissertation, I could not write at my house. My house was quiet. It was before I had a kid. But I will tell you I wanted to sweep my house more than I wanted to write. Nobody wants to sweep, I don't think, except that is what I wanted to do. So I couldn't write at my house. I just couldn't do it. And so you have to think about where is the most effective place for you to study and when is it most effective for you to study. So for those of you that are going to try to squeeze in a few hours of studying after a fully packed day, you have to decide, you know, are you as effective, you know, from 8 to 11 p.m., or could you somehow shift your schedule a little bit and get up a little bit earlier and maybe put in 2 hours and be more effective than trying to do some studying at night when you might be more tired? Time is somewhat fluid, and so you might want to be thinking about that. So I have these two pictures here, sort of this hummingbird and these dying batteries. So I strongly believe that there are two essentially different types of people out there. So we have our hummingbirds. I am a self-professed hummingbird, and I just go, 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 go until I cannot go anymore, and then I just like pass out. So this is why you will find me on my couch at 8:30 at night, every night, and this has always been the case from even when I was young and before having a kid. And then you have people that need to recharge their batteries throughout the day. They take breaks, and then they feel good, and then they can keep going. So really think about that as you're scheduling out your time and scheduling out when you're going to study and get your work in. Are you somebody that needs to take a break after a long day and then you can hit the books? Or are you someone that if you take a break, you're just not going to get back up and start working again? So be really honest with yourself, because I know for me, if I worked all day and had class and then went home, I would not start studying at 8 p.m. It would not happen. But for many of you, that might be okay to take the break. You might need the break. So self-management is key. I call the idea of time management self-management, because again, we all have the same amount of time in our day, 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in our week. And so I encourage you to create a master calendar, and I'll pass out this handout in just a minute. And on that calendar, I again would suggest like an electronic calendar, Google Calendar, and put in all of your fixed commitments. So all of your class time, anything that you know is already happening. So any appointments with your advisors, any lab time, if you're working, your work schedule. And then you can see any holes in your schedule where you will want to schedule out things like studying. You also want to set time to protect time for exercising, meal planning, family time. And most importantly, you want to make sure you have hours set aside for studying. How many of you are taking mostly online courses? Just a few. I will tell you that I think one of the things that our learners who take online courses really struggle with is how much time should I be spending in the online environment versus when I take classes in person. And so I will just say, because there's only a few of you, if you're taking a 4-credit class, you need to make sure you're setting aside the same amount of time to spend in the online environment that you would if you were taking an in-person class. I also encourage you to think about your weeks beginning and ending on Fridays, because for many of you, the largest chunk of time you're going to have to yourself is the weekend. So when you walk out of wherever on Friday, look ahead, look at your calendar, see what's coming up. Do you have any exams? Do you have any papers that are due? Do you have anything big the next week? And do you have to reallocate some of that weekend or more of that weekend to studying and getting things done? And then commitment creates method. So this is one of my favorite quotes. If you commit to doing something and setting that intention, you will figure out a way to fit it all in. And then this goes back to creating school-life balance. And I say sort of, because I think at different parts of your program, you're going to feel like you're more in balance. And then sometimes you're going to feel like, wow, everything I'm doing is really about school. But it's really important that you don't ignore your social networks. You take time for you. And again, your upperclassmates really wanted to share that it's important to take time for yourself, have hobbies and a social life, because graduate school is hard. And there are some highs and some lows. Make friends, lean on each other. Mostly communicate with your partners. So for those of you that have families and partners, when you need to take time for yourself to do schoolwork, they need to know. So that communication piece is really important. And then manage expectations. So I think that's expectations of yourself, what you're capable of, and also being realistic with how much time it takes to do things. And lastly, this is a list of resources that you have available to you to help you through this whole entire process. So I'm available. You have your career development specialist, Virginia, your academic advisor, Diane. You have your course directors. You have JBT, who is here to help support you both if you get sick. They also have a counseling center. March Wellness, if you just need to go exercise, go for a swim. Office of Student Access, if you're somebody that has had accommodations in the past, or you feel like that sounds like something that you might need to inquire about. You also have each other, but most importantly, I encourage you to think about your using yourself. I think students forget that they have a voice in this whole entire process. Advocate for yourself. If there's something that you need to speak up. You need to talk to anyone on this list and say, one of my needs is not being met, and advocate for yourself. I think lots of times our learners forget that their voice should be one of the loudest so that we can help you be successful. So main takeaways: active studying. Please do not be passive. Learn statistics, work on your writing, find mentors, reach out. There are multiple resources to help you, and take time for yourself, because balance is really key as you approach this somewhat long journey that is graduate school. All right. Any questions? But I have two more handouts. I have the time management handout, which just talks a little bit more about calendaring, and then a quick evaluation, just because it helps me, and again, data, it's important. And I'll pass those out.